Welcome to our Elemental webinar on improving standards in indoor air quality. I'm Andrew David, Editor-at-Large for Elemental, and I'm joined today by a panel of experts from across the ventilation and IAQ sectors. With this webinar, we're seeking to take on a discussion that we started at a session at the Installer Show last summer. So I'm delighted in a moment to be able to welcome one of those panelists, Nathan Wood, MD of Farmwood M&E, to introduce the themes. Now, Nathan is joined by Francesca Brady of Aerated, Sam Dorr of Flat Group, Dave Kieft of EFT Consult, and Matt Malachy of Carrier, a bumper panel for a bumper session. There are a lot of issues to be discussed around air quality, whether it's the regulatory environment, the technology, or indeed the human impact, which itself includes the dangers of air pollution and mould, or addressing the issues of COVID, down to simple occupant comfort. But Nathan and our panelists will be telling us why they think 2024 is set to be a crucial year for IAQ. We've got a lot to get through. There's a lot of you on the call, so it just leaves me to ask you to use the Q&A box for any questions you may have and to keep them short. And so without further ado, Nathan, it's over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time to attend. Really important one, this. Me and Andrew, as we say, had a really good chat in the corner of the conference last year, agreed on this webinar, left it to the last minute to organise and get everybody on the panel. So I think you'll all agree we have got a stellar lineup of everybody here. I'll let them introduce themselves as we go through, but just a little bit from myself. So Nathan Wood, Managing Director of Farmwood M&E. We're a ventilation specialist, established in 2002. Some of you will know me from my work with BISA and other associations, but I've got a real passion for changing the industry. I think a lot needs shaking up. I thought COVID would have achieved a lot, but you know, COVID's over now apparently, so everybody's just going back to this normal world. But I think with the insight from the speakers that we've got on today, you'll see that there is a drive, there is people wanting to do more. We just need to see the willingness from our industry, from our customers, from our clients, the end users, which ultimately improves the health and well-being of people in buildings, whether that be social housing, councils, private dwellings, through to conferences, sporting arenas, you name it, buildings, places we spend up to 90% of our time. So we just want to get straight into it. And I think what better place to start than with Dave, with a little bit of insight into what he's been up to with his business and all of the work around publicly available standards and the British standard that's coming through. So Dave, do you want to take the floor, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Nathan. For the people that don't know me, I've worked in the industry for over 40 years at the highest level of our professional bodies and guiding legislation and many other things within the industry. A number of years ago, we identified it back in 2015, the problems with IAQ, but also IEQ, and how they affect each other. So we set off, and my business, one of my businesses, EFT Consult, sponsored at that time what was called PAS 3003, which was the first ever global PAS to try and identify the parameters of what these issues were. Very quickly, we found out that many people had lots of ideas of what the problems were, but from the World Health Organization right across the globe, ASHA in America and everywhere else, seemingly everybody had different ideas of what human-centric well-being was and what affected us. So the challenge was with the PAS was to get some discussion going in relation to what those environmental issues were that affected human-centric well-being. And we started on that story in 2019 after 4 years of research. As we all know, March 2020, COVID kicked in. And sorry, Nathan, one good thing that did happen from COVID, and there is a good output, is that it made everybody very quickly aware of the environment they lived and worked in, and that accelerated IAQ and IEQ like nothing else could have. So the only good thing that I know that came out of it was that it accelerated all that we were previously talking about. What happened was during that year is the PAS that we were sponsoring to deliver started its steering group with a selection of many people from medical, from every specialist environment you can think of in relation to IEQ. And what happened was, after the steering groups had to not meet in London any longer and had to meet on Teams, etc., In about August in 2020, what BSI and others in the industry said that what we were leading with the PAS was cutting edge. They asked us, would we cancel the PAS and take it straight into a British standard, which was obviously a major step in relation to the PAS being cancelled and going straight to a British standard. So that then came into before the format of BSI 40102-01, and that took then another 2 years via public consultations and technical submissions and lots of other things that we had to jump through, and became completed in about towards the end of 2022. That went then for technical submission to BSI for legalisation and became an actual British standard in April 2023. During 2023, and the reason that we hadn't launched it fully is there were some technical people who asked some particular questions in relation to some of the levels that we'd identified, and we had to clarify those because obviously the British standard has to be correct. So that is now all done. The technical queries have been answered, and the reason for it all from my perspective is from a couple of elements. One, in Wales, we have the Future Generations Act, which is something that is very prevalent in making sure that we at our age now and our generation look after our future generations. From that perspective, my children, my children's children, etc., is very important to myself, as it is, I'm sure, to many others. But also from our clients' perspective, to make them aware, 50% of my business is FM, and to make our clients aware of the issues in their environments, what they are, how we can identify them. We've got sensors now that we've developed and platforms that we meter and monitor into, and how we can take the next stages to rectify those issues in the built environment to the benefit of our future generations. A little bit about stop there. I'd feel myself, but it's been a long 8 years, nearly 9 years in getting to where we are today. This year it launches properly. Nathan and I had a meeting yesterday with the industry, medical, and etc. From this year on, we were at COP28. We had sensors in COP28. We had information from COP28. We reported on the environmental conditions at COP28. So we've got a lot of global interest in relation to what we're doing, and now is the time to take those steps to make a change.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Dave. I mean, it's amazing what you've achieved, and it does frustrate me the time that takes to achieve things like this. I understand there's processes that we need to go through. It's interesting because, I mean, Francesca, on the panel, you've been doing lots of sensoring and monitoring in buildings. I'm going to say mainly high-end buildings. Maybe you'll tell me otherwise, but it does seem to be a lot of awareness at the higher ends, maybe with the ESG mark and people looking to kite mark their buildings. There's lots of discussion about retention of staff, attracting staff, and whether or not your building is a healthy environment to be in. So maybe you want to touch a little bit on that for us, please.
Yeah, and I think you're right in saying that a lot of the buildings that we've monitored and awarded certification to are upper end on the specification, but that's because it's a voluntary accreditation and people will ordinarily start with the buildings that they know are going to perform well. What we've started to see is our clients understand that their portfolios range in specification and range in performance. Some of their buildings are mechanically ventilated, and this is commercial offices or residential developments, and some are naturally ventilated. And as we all know, naturally ventilated spaces are much less controlled environments. So the natural assumption is that these won't perform quite as well. So what we're seeing some of our clients do is, yes, get their flagship buildings signed up and awarded with accreditation, and they shout from the rooftops about it, but they're also doing it on the buildings that they see as at-risk assets. So they want to understand what their lowest performing buildings are in order to understand what level of investment needs to go into them. And then they make a judgment call. Does this leave our fund or does this stick around? And we just make the necessary enhancements and upgrades to get to a certain standard. And perhaps they're saying all their buildings need to meet at least AirScore certified. So for people that don't know what AirScore is, AirScore is the certification awarded by Aerated, a certification body. I'm the CEO of Aerated. And it's a communication tool really more than anything else, but they want it to act as a performance tracker for their buildings and to benchmark their portfolio, but also benchmark against their peer group and have it feed up into things like GRESB, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark.
Sorry, I was on mute then. I was listening and paying attention, I promise.
Good.
So we've got standards. We've got new standards. I mean, standards have been around. We've always had, the Health and Safety at Work Act stipulates that we must have adequate air within our buildings, and we're all sat within buildings now. We've got the new legislation coming through, the new standards. Francesca and Aerated and everything they do. I see that as more of your flagship. I do. That's the glossy in a way. But you mentioned at-risk buildings. So if you identify a building at risk, you need people like Sam and Matt, maybe myself, that are like the service providers, the sellers of the equipment. So are they open to that discussion when you say you might have a problem here? Because more often than not, there is no budget for clean air. There's budget for maybe a bit of makeup air or you crack a window open. So what's the response when you start talking about potentially sometimes quite big figures?
Yeah, I think it's because we come at it from a position of certification, and then we would say the hierarchy of remediation. You would start with behavioral things because they are lowest cost. They are sometimes slightly easier to implement. Then you go to operation, and then you go to mechanical. So we always introduce the improvement conversation leading with that, and then saying, but you really need to go to a specialist because they will lay out a roadmap for you. And also they will help you understand how much this is going to cost, because we don't want to do that. So we're saying this is the performance of your assets, and we're giving you a framework and a guidance to go to specialists with, but then we're going to pass you over. So with that in mind, most of our clients are interested in understanding more about what improvement looks like. It's a slow process because the level of understanding hasn't increased at the same rate as awareness. So I think awareness means like you're seeing loads about it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're any more informed. So it's what started to happen with sustainability and the climate crisis. And now it's happening with indoor air quality and outdoor air quality to a degree as well. So it's one of those things where we are trying to help the conversation, because sometimes it can be really anxiety inducing from an end user's perspective, whether it's a landlord or an occupier, to think, oh my God, I don't have air quality that's very good. I need to make improvements. That's going to cost loads of money. And it's just like there's a mental barrier for people at the moment thinking it's going to cost the earth to fix. It's not necessarily, but you are probably you're going to need some amount of investment. And then it's just assessing what that is. I feel like Matt wants to add to that.
Go for it, Matt. Go on.
Okay, I agree. Completely agree with what you're saying, Francesca. People are afraid of the cost. And we found during the pandemic, when you talk about certain technology that's available to improve, I'm not going to say fix, to improve indoor air quality, these technologies came at quite a cost. What we've discovered over the years since working through the pandemic, evolving our own products very quickly to help with that situation we all found ourselves in, is that on the flip side, there's a lot of positive benefits to gain from some minor improvements. So we can have significant improvement in indoor air quality and building efficiency by simply observing the basics. And this is something I try and focus on, is the basics. We hear about climate change fatigue, indoor pollution fatigue, and people tend to see it as a depressing subject. My spin on it has been always positive. Let's not look at how bad things are. Let's look at how much better we can make things with a plan, of course, but with a focus on the basics. If we observe design standards, specifications are there for a reason. Air change rates, the different applications of filters and duct sizing and logistics in where you position intakes and outtakes of a space in order to get good circulation with the space. If we observe those principles effectively, we can improve things. If we operate demand control ventilation, we can maintain not only good indoor air quality, but system efficiency. And something I feel we focus on too much is the expense of the change rather than the savings it brings in energy, but not only energy. If we think about some statistics, 44% of adults suffer with allergies, 50% of children suffer with allergies. You have somewhere like that means there's 18 million people in the UK suffering with allergies. 2.7 million of those are off sick every year. It's a £7 billion cost to the economy. That cost is on the employer. Also, those people possibly are feeling unhappy because they're not at work earning their keep. They want to be living a normal, active daily existence, and they want to be at work. They want to leave work feeling satisfied. I feel much better at the end of the day when it's been productive. So simply put, it's not just about the cost of a system or the cost of the maintenance. It's a bigger picture. Healthier, happier people, as much as it is less energy costs, good system maintenance, etc. It's much wider than just the tech and those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think as well, it's something like one in 3 people now have asthma, and more people develop asthma rather than are born with it. So, we're quite on the panel. We're quite aware of this. I mean, Sam, coming from a residential point of view with flats, have you seen an uptake in people looking to specify things beyond the bare minimum that we design things to?
Yeah, completely. We're seeing, as Matt's mentioned, increase in demand control ventilation. So we've seen a big increase in our numbers of CO2 sensors within our residential units. Now, we know it's commonplace in the commercial sector, but it hasn't always been the way with residential. It's been, well, as we know, there's been too much poor mechanical ventilation in residential dwellings for too long, just your bog standard on-off fan, no overrun timer. But now, as we start to see more and more heat recovery units being installed, the more options we can offer and develop on the control strategy, like Matt was saying on the commercial element too, the more benefit we're going to gain in those properties. Because like you said, so my role is global product manager, so I not only look after the UK for Flat, but I look after the Nordics and Central Europe too. So today I'm at our office in Birmingham, but generally I work from home. So when we're thinking about residential ventilation, it's not just residential anymore, right? It's a multifunctional. It's my workplace as well as my home. It's where my kids, it's an extension of their education and their school. And so monitoring shouldn't stop in the office, because I don't know about yourselves, I'm sure everybody works from home at least one day a week these days. So that's where we come in again with the control strategy. CO2, humidity sensors been around for a long time. Personally, I think CO2 is a better thing for our overall air quality, just to monitor those levels in terms of productivity. But we're certainly seeing a change and an increase in the requests for more demand control options.
It's positive to hear, but at the same time, with more complex, if you like, systems being specified, in my world, we do a lot more social housing works than what we used to. We've sort of been, I can't say dragged into it, but there was a lot of demand for our services to get in there and get involved and look at the historical failings, if you like. Go on, Dave, jump in.
Yeah, certainly. I think that we're going to find that this year there's going to be some other major drivers coming into the industry. What we've seen is that from the insurance, well, just for a little bit of an update with the PAS and the British Standard, we were asked to remove residential from our first offering of the PAS. Yeah. Now that was for a reason, and the reason being is that it's a slightly different environment, obviously, to your commercial environment, yeah, which has usually got some sort of mechanical ventilation, BMS, or whatever else it may have. But also, don't forget the standards now set levels that people can monitor against. Now, we saw back a number of years ago a company in London, its employees suing its employers for the environment they were working in and winning handsomely. Now, I gave a presentation to the professional body of insurers back about 18 months ago to only learn that that is now happening on a weekly basis, and especially in the residential environment. Now, there was a letter went out, and Nathan, you've seen a copy of the letter that went out to over 6,000 insurance companies not by myself or my business, but by the insurance companies to themselves, warning people of the impending risk of being sued by people using your buildings and your building not performing in the manner that it should. Yeah, and that letter went out, as you saw, to over 6,000 people on day one. Yeah, from their own environment. Now, the reason that we agreed to take domestic out is that if you take from a social landlord's perspective, social landlords usually build to pattern books. So if you've got a plot of land, there's so many A's, so many C's, so many E's, so many different types of flats, etc. If that legislation was in place for that environment at this moment in time, you would go into one flat, you would fail that one flat, and I'm telling you it would fail. I guarantee 100% that every environment will fail. You go into one of those flats and you'd measure the qualities in that flat, it would fail, and you'd have a legal position on your hand. So we agreed to take residential out of the first iteration of the British Standard. Now, we have now started the domestic British Standard because most of it is already done by the creation of the original PAS and the original British Standard, albeit understanding there are differentiators in the domestic market. So the reason we took it out, we didn't want to become an enemy to everybody in Britain very quickly, especially in the social landlord position, but it is coming. And what the insurers told me, which I didn't know myself until the presentation, was that these claims are happening weekly at this moment in time. People are being paid off, very similar to what happened with the insurance claims with cars. When someone run in the back of your car, here's £3,000, go away, you can't ever claim ever again. That is now happening and being paid off on a weekly basis. The minute we put proper legislation around it, which is happening again this year, then those people will have the tool to sue their landlords, which is not good. So what we are doing is becoming the landlord social housing provider's friend and offering them our sensors, our platforms to help them understand what the problems with their environment are and then set a plan for rectification and investment. So we are the industry's friend, not the aggressor, and we're making people aware ignorance is no defense. This is coming, IEQ is coming, air is a component of that. Natural ventilation systems, Francesca, you spoke about earlier, are not good because obviously if you see high CO2 in your environment, you open the window and you're going to poison everybody in the building by the road fumes outside. That's not a good thing. So we actually measure internal environmental qualities in relation to external, and then using a bit of AI, make an informed decision as to what needs to be done, which is the least damage to the person who's breathing that in that environment. So there's a lot of changes, a lot of legislation, a lot of things happening.
So I'm just waving here, Nathan, so I can get it's a good point to put in a question, actually. We've been asked, is there enough understanding of humidity and moisture in the profession and by the public in general? I was going to sort of broaden that out because obviously mould and damp is very much in the public eye at the moment. And clearly social housing has got an issue that needs to deal with that. I mean, what is the sort of the industry mood as to how the sort of the customers are addressing it at the moment?
Can I jump in really quick because this is a real big one for me? Sorry, and then everybody
can answer it. That's fine. You can answer one of my questions.
Yeah, good. So just quickly, recently we attended a relatively new block of flats that had these lovely balconies on the outside. They looked lovely, clad, everything else, energy efficient. We went inside because of some mould complaints. The residents were unable to dry their clothes outside on their balconies because they were wooden balconies and it was a risk of fire. So the ventilation strategy, they were told, had been addressed by having humidistats on their extract fans that would run if the humidity was high when they're drying clothes inside. The fans were running 24/7, 365, so the residents turned them off. Those worried about the cost and everything else, they turn them off, humidity rises, dew point, mould starts. As soon as mould kicks in, regardless what you do with the ventilation strategy, you need to then address the mould. And this is new. Then there's retrofit that we may come on to later. So from a strategy point of view, their response was, we'll fit a humidity switch. So had they built the balconies out of non-combustible materials, people could have aired their clothing outside and it wouldn't have been a fire risk, and then they wouldn't have had the issues over the poor humidity levels inside their property. But if anybody else wants to field in, that's just a little insight from me.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Nathan. Just doing some reading. Obviously, at the moment, we've got the Future Home Standard under consultation for updates to Part L, Part F. There's also the consultation on the implementation of Abb's Law as well. And within this, it speaks about, if you've worked in social housing, you've worked with condensation and mould issues, the dreaded L word, lifestyle, always comes into it. And when we talk about lifestyle, we're talking about breathing, bathing, cooking, cleaning, drying your laundry. And it states quite clearly in the ministerial foreword that this is a normal part of life. So you should be able to dry your clothes inside if you need to. You know, if you think of some central tower blocks in London, so we, you know, the ones we've been up on, Nathan, over the years, they're 18, 19 stories. If the lift's not broken, or maybe there isn't a lift at all, you've got to carry a basket of wet washing all the way down those stairs to hang in a drying area outside. It's not going to happen. You should be able to utilise your property, and therefore you need adequate ventilation for it. When it comes, reverting back to your question, Andrew, of does the industry understand humidity? I suppose it depends what part of the overall industry we're talking about. The Property Care Association have done lots of studies alongside UCL looking at humidity levels, vapour pressures. Dave, when you're saying about your IEQ measurement, you're taking comparative readings indoor and outdoor. You must do that with humidity as well. You know, some people have seen reports diagnose 85% humidity, install new fans. They've measured it on a muggy day in the middle of May, and it's 85% humidity outside as well. You know,
to be honest, Sam, the humidity,
the overall picture.
Yeah, Sam, humidity was one of the points that we do measure and have to measure. And I think during COVID, it became very aware that obviously the transfer of COVID at certain humidity levels travels much easier than it does in other environments. So the correlation of heat, humidity, a lot of different things, when they all come together as IEQ, means a much more dangerous environment. What we're actually seeing as well, Andrew, we as specialists understand humidity. The general public, I think, as a whole, are not aware of it, and a lot of the profession isn't aware of it properly as to what those effects can be in relation to the building and to the occupants of the building. And that is why one of the parameters of the British Standard is humidity in relation to the other elements. What we're finding in social housing, and we've seen a lot of it, is a lot more people buying anti-mould paint, and a lot more people coming into the market who are going to social housing covering up problems rather than rectifying problems. So if you look at the sale of that paint into professions and the setup of small businesses as mould specialists, all they're doing is covering up the problem, not actually dealing with the problem. So it's a much bigger issue. And the other one that came up yesterday, Nathan, as you know, we have some doctors in the room, is that with mould, it's not just the mould in the corner, it's the spores from the mould that cause the problem. So it's once the mould grows and then someone touches the mould and that goes into the air, that is a massive problem, which has got respiratory connotations that we're not fully aware of yet. Sorry, Matthew.
No, that's okay. I was just wanted to point out it's not just in social housing we see this problem. We are very good at improving in the built environment in our industry, and with that improvement, the efficiency of buildings, they become more airtight. I have a number of friends that are living in brand new property, and inside of a year, they're experiencing condensation on the windows with buckets of water coming off the windows every morning in the winter, and they have mold problems. These are brand new properties. In attempting to be efficient from an energy perspective, we've caused another problem. I do think, I spend a lot of time reading legislation, I do think the additions to Part F kind of address it, which is positive to see that people are thinking about it in terms of if you make modifications to a building, you need to consider A, B, and C. There's the tables at the end of the documents where if you're making major or minor changes, you need to consider certain elements of your indoor air quality and ventilation, as well as just the thermal improvements. But it's not just social housing. We need to be clear on that. It affects everybody, and it's really important to note that.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that point, Matt. And also, having done some work in anything from kind of mid-range housing down to social housing, I think there's a lack of understanding about responsibility to a point. So we're seeing some social housing, but also just housing pop up everywhere. And it's really concerning to think that the same problems are just going to crop up again and again and again, because there hasn't really been a proper inquest into any of the properties that have been delivered in the past decade to say, how do they then perform? Like, we have changed regulations slightly, not a great deal, in the last decade. What was the resultant performance then of those changes? But also, where we've been in properties before that have extractors and they just aren't being used or aren't really being effectively maintained, that is also a massive issue. There are issues from design all the way through to use. And I think there needs to be a little bit more done in terms of educating people about where their responsibility lies. So as the end user, what do I need to know that exists in my space and how am I meant to use it? Because I might have trickle ventilation, but if I don't work in air quality, I'm going to look at those little slats above the window and think, that's drafty, close. When actually, yeah, the best thing to do would be to just open them overnight when levels of pollution outside are nice and low and all this sort of stuff. But no one is going to naturally know that, nor are they necessarily going to Google it. Because I Googled trickle ventilation once, and it took me to a YouTube link about a guy teaching you how to foam it, seal it shut. And I was like,
Yeah, excellent.
so there is
You
the wrong education for that.
You touched on a point there.
Back in 2015, back in 2015, when we started on this road, it was following a presentation in the brewery in London with Bizria, and we had one of the top respiratory experts in Britain actually give a presentation that set me on the path to where I am today in relation to this. And that gentleman gave a presentation in the correlation of how our environments have become much more energy efficient and more airtight in relation to generational increases in asthma, which at that time, over 3 decades, were up over 300%. And that's what set me on the path to trying to identify, was that correct? And actually, when we did actually look at it, it was correct. So human beings are far better, healthier, living in leaky coal boxes, energy inefficient for our human health. And what we're creating is an environment that's affecting our health to the benefit of living cheaper. So what happened is that as we create these environments, we're not controlling them properly. And you're right, is that if people have the ability to intervene and do something to them without the knowledge of why it's there in the first place, which is why the FM, and there's been some good changes under CDM, Construction Design and Management, which has now moved responsibilities to FM providers. So if you're a chief executive of a housing association, for argument's sake, if you haven't got the proper people and proper controls in place, and you aren't fully aware of your responsibilities, then it is the chief executive who will end up in court, not the FM guy who really doesn't know perhaps what he should be doing. So I think what you're going to find through the FM, we've got a massive FM part of our business, SFG 20 legislation, a lot of controls coming in place, legal compliance. We're seeing a raft of legislation coming down the line in the industry, and that's going to drive to make sure that whatever solutions we put in place in the future, they're maintained properly beyond the installation. Otherwise, somebody's going to be held responsible for them.
That's exactly what I was going to lean toward, Dave. It's something I know Nathan spends a lot of time. I'm going to use the word preaching, but Nathan spends a lot of time banging the drum about system maintenance. And I think it's easy to spend time, energy, money on designing and installing a system. But if we don't look after it once it's in, it doesn't operate as we intend it to. The buildings aren't ventilated as we intend them to be. The air isn't as clean as we intend it to be, and the energy consumption and occupant well-being isn't where we intend it to be. And I think it's again, it comes back to my passion, which is the basics. Design a good system, use the right materials, look after it properly for its lifetime.
Yeah, and a big part of that, Matthew, has been value engineering, or what I call devalue engineering.
Exactly,
It's
that's yeah.
Instead of putting the proper systems in, designed properly at a fair cost, with good quality systems, it's the first thing, the M&E installations, that get cut, and the quality of the kit in a value engineering proposition.
And this is where education is important, because it may be that the capital cost of an item seems a bit scary, shall we say, for the purchaser of a business. If you look at the long-term savings across the building's lifetime, shall we say, the capital expense versus the operational expense is something that needs to be looked at in a lot more detail. And again, coming back to demand control ventilation, a building's energy cost is 60% of it is the HVAC and the heating and vent. So demand control ventilation significantly improves that by 60 to 40%. It's a huge sum of money. And not only is the space running efficiently, generally, I say this all the time, a healthy building is an efficient building is a clean building, clean in terms of maintenance as well as the air quality.
I'm just going to jump in before I let Nathan carry on, to try and roll a few questions in, and then that will take us on nice, I think, because it's interesting that some of the Q&As have, there's a theme here, and one of the themes is cost. And there's a good point is being made, is that are we as an industry doing the best that we can to actually explain all the on costs of the improvement? So it's not just the capital costs, it's the cost of absenteeism and all those kind of things. So that's the first comment to throw in. Somebody's making a point also that we've discussed a little bit about, is there now a conflict between the energy efficiency and having adequate ventilation, and is that being well understood by the people whose job it is to maintain that, and the FMs, etc. And then the final one, which any one of you can come back to, are you finding that the social housing providers are actually got a budget now, or an adequate budget, for mould prevention and for indoor IEQ? So I now say that, Dave, for you, IEQ improvements. So is there a, what is the sort of view from the customer angle?
Can I start off with the CapEx, OpEx issue? Often the team who are building the building or paying for the retrofit or whatever it may be, the CapEx is not aligned with the OpEx. So what happens is people cut things at CapEx, people in OpEx have to pick up afterwards, and after a couple of years end up with all the problems of not having it designed properly and installed properly in the first place. So it's making people, funders, aware, or the client aware. There's so many clients I catch up with who say, if I'd only known this at the time we were building the building. And because of some unscrupulous construction company that just came in and said, we can value engineer, take £1 million off that project, yeah, and it'll be great for you, without the realization of what they're actually doing to the quality of the installation and the ongoing maintenance of it. So what we've done with a lot of the kit that we provide these days is that and to drive the ability for high-end and better equipment, we are leasing the installations to people so that they know at CapEx, they know for the next 10 years what their operational costs are through the whole process. So it's changing the way that we fund things to make it more affordable. What that does drive is, from a leasing company's perspective, the leasing company is taking the risk. So the leasing company wants to make sure it's got the best kit at day one, and we have to do the same because we are maintaining it. It's our liability for that period of time. So you're working with high-end suppliers who will warrant their kit for the period of time. So it's not the cheapest. It's not the stuff that's going to break down in 3.5 years' time out of your warranty. Yeah. So it's driving the quality, and the people have to appreciate, the client have to appreciate the effect CapEx, OpEx has in that situation. Otherwise, we're never going to fix it. So I call it devalue engineering, not value engineering, because all it does is take the real values out of what we engineer.
Yeah, agreed, Dave. Value engineering, often the two most expensive words in a project.
Yeah.
So we've been doing it for years at Flat. We provide LCC calculations for our customers. So particularly for kind of FM customers or end users when they're concerned about operational costs. This more on the commercial front. Matt, I'm sure you do the same as well, where we can demonstrate, yes, you need to invest X amount up front, but your payback time by moving to a fully demand controlled system, for example, certainly with integrated controls, your payback time often is within a couple of years. It's really quick.
So what we've also done as well is during that calculation is that with funders now, and it is related to ESG reporting, funders are now loaning with a conscience. So if your ESG reporting is poor, you can borrow money at a higher interest rate. Whereas if your ESG reporting is good, you can borrow at a lower interest rate. So it's trying to drive the correct movements in the market to do the right things. And also what we have also identified, and we've done it with the government, is that if you use well-being as the lead on a project, you get sustainability and decarbonisation as a free output. If you do decarbonisation or sustainability only, you don't get well-being. So if you use well-being as the leading component, you get sustainability and decarbonisation as a free output.
I was going to say, I think with a lot of these things, the decisions are driven by commercial gain, or fear of some kind of bad reputational damage, or a devaluation of a fund or an asset. It's unfortunately, and I'm going to say, I don't know whether this is the opinion across the panel, but what I've seen is very little of the time, this is going to sound so bad, very little of the time is it done with the end user in mind.
No.
The person in the building. It's not. Which is so sad, because technically the people making the decisions are also those people in the buildings. But regardless of that, and it's where there's a difference between kind of like the consumer. So if a consumer wants to do something, they want to control their space, it's a lot more emotive because it's like, well, it's my space, it's my home. When it comes to a business, you lose that emotive decision making completely, and then it just comes down to numbers. So it's devastating in one regard, but it's good that these measures are coming into place to force decision makers' hands to do it. And then as a byproduct, yes, you get positive outcomes for workplace and residential well-being. But yeah, it's kind of the more sinister side of it. But it is good to see all of these gains that can be had where decisions are being driven towards well-being. It's just a shame that it's not driven by the health of the people in the building, which is where it's scary.
You couldn't have said anything more real. The thing is that a lot of the companies want a badge, want to say that they're leading the way. A lot of companies want to do that and why they're doing things, not for the real reason why they should be doing them. But we are now starting to drive that they have to do these things. But yes, you are right. The money and the badge is what people are going for, rather than the reality of what it is affecting, which is concerning for all of us.
I agree, but I have a but to interject there. I spend a lot of time dealing with end users. It's the main part of my role at Carrier is to deal with the verticals. I focus on commercial, resi, and hospitality. And I agree, but I don't disagree, but I have a counter argument, I suppose. I think the intention is there, and we have to remember, we've talked about it several times. We live in a very commercial world right now. Money is tight, budgets are squeezed, projects are on strict deadlines, and somewhere something has to give. And unfortunately, those things are commercially driven, as you said, Francesca. Now, this comes down to us educating, and I think it leads nicely into that question that's just been asked about. In working on good ventilation and providing a healthy building, are we having a conflict against the efficiency of a building? And I think with more education, I spend literally weekly, I'm delivering CPDs talking about this very subject. I think a healthy building versus an efficient building, I think the two, as Dave mentioned, they complement one another in many ways. And again, it's in one of the questions, are we doing what we can to educate? We are, and clearly Sam over there at FLACT are doing the same. We're talking, we're being honest about the problems, we're advising on solutions, high end, low end, medium cost solutions, and all the benefits that can be had. But I think if we were to see any more policies or legislation being introduced, it should be on an education piece, not on how to monitor, on should building designers, end users, owner operators have a stipulation, much like consultants where they have to attend CPDs. Should these owner operators need to attend a set number of modules per year to understand efficiency, health, well-being, productivity, mental health impacts your productivity at work, all of those things. So it's broad, it's difficult. I feel like I need to stand up for the end users a little bit, because I think the intention is there, but we all face the same problems. It's a commercial squeeze that we all have. I'm sure when you have customers trying to purchase your services, they talk about price all the time. So it's a delicate area to discuss. I agree with everything we're all saying here, but in having worked across many sectors, I kind of empathise a little bit, because I've been there and I understand the squeeze that they face as well.
I think it's I mean, obviously with like completely get that point. With the allocation of funds, I think it's an interesting topic to look at, because with some big organizations, they have a marketing fund, they have different types of budgets, and it feels like air quality falls into an operational budget, which is always the tightest. And it's like they could start pulling from other places, because it was this whole when COVID was around, and there was that article that came out to say schools don't have budget for air. I think that is true to a degree, but it's also probably no one's really looked at where the budget could come from. It doesn't need to come from the place that you think it needs to come from. You could draw it from anywhere, because there are marketing benefits, reputational benefits in terms of showcasing that you've got the best place to come and work. If we're going to say you have to come into the office 3 times a week, at least we can show it's healthy. So it's all about staff retention and attrition. But it's just being a bit clever, I think, with budget. And you're right, Matt, that everything is commercial, but sometimes there are quite strange decisions being made. So it's like we'll spend tens of thousands of pounds on flowers to go into the office, but we won't spend it on air. Why? And I think at the moment it does come down to education.
One thing, Francesca, I will say is that very jealously, most of you are Gen Z, not my end of the age spectrum, but from your perspective, your generations have it better than what we did in relation to you've got more knowledge, and to be honest, knowledge is power, and it's a good thing from Gen Z's perspective. We've got stuff going on in schools now that we're sponsoring. We are actually educating through a futurescape, so our children of the future, as to the values of what we're trying to say in the industry. And it is a generational thing. It is an educational part. And in line with the British standards, we've created a set of CPDs and training documents to go with it, to make sure that people who are undertaking the works understand why they're undertaking it and to what benefit. And we're working with BISA at the moment in time, and we were talking about it yesterday. It's about competency. It's about making sure the right people are doing the right things. So there's a whole plethora of things that go alongside. Yes, find out what the problem is. How do you rectify it? How do you do it properly? How do you maintain it? How do you make sure for the life of it it's working properly? If you don't maintain it, filters become dirty, it becomes energy inefficient, because obviously for lots of other reasons. So, and with the people is a big thing, because we've done some research with America, some American companies who've actually done some of these things, and their sickness rate has dropped right down. 30% drop in sickness rate. Productivity's gone up. They involve their people in what they are doing, so they don't just do it to them, they involve them in it. So they explain to them, if we do this with the building and make it more efficient, etc., as well as making it healthier. So engaging those people that are using the building in the end result is very important, to make sure they appreciate what's happening. Healthier, better environments, less sickness, more productivity actually outweighs the cost of installing it right in the first place.
So Dave, you bring up an important point that we haven't addressed yet, and we've only got 11 minutes to do so. So I think we better throw it in, and that's the competence of the industry to deliver it. Building Safety Act talks a lot about competence. There's a question come in about, we know what the problem is, but do we have the competence to deliver it? There's another question coming in saying, are we able to provide the technology in the right format to the end user? So Nathan, do you want to speak to the whole area of competence and national occupational standards and the like?
Yeah, I've only had a call this morning regarding national occupational standards because for my business, we spend a lot of money on our team. I'm a huge advocate of apprenticeships and quality and competence in line with the Building Safety Act. And that should scare the hell out of everybody that's on this call, because it scares the hell out of me, trying to dig into it and understand where you need to be and where you need to align with. And certainly we're trying to take our customers on that journey as well, because there's still that race to the bottom. What's the cheapest? What can we get away with? We just to come back, we need to put people first and foremost when we're talking about buildings. Now, we have more of an impact on people's health than their doctor. It's a fact. What we tinker with on the roof or in their cupboard has an impact on them straight away. So if we're looking at dealing with these issues, we understand micrograms per meters cube, liters per second. We understand all of the algorithms within our industry. It's so easy to twist and contort the data. I mean, Francesca, I'm sure you've seen horrifying reports where somebody's trying to flog the latest bit of kit with a flashing light. Let's do the study properly. Well, actually, it's not that bad. You may not need that. So in terms of competence and compliance, in line with the Building Safety Act, you will need a national occupational standard in ventilation. You will need probably a further one to split it down into residential and commercial ventilation. You will then need probably individual ones on indoor air quality and how far that would go, because I certainly think that people need a basic level understanding. Then you need a competence for the installers, the commissioners, the maintenance company, and then you need beyond that where you have the housing providers and their responsibility, because ultimately if I'm working for anybody, in the eyes of the law, they must understand what I'm doing and the reasons that I'm doing that. So many don't. Which is why if anybody follows us on LinkedIn, you will see ventilation units mounted to a plasterboard wall without any core drill for the air to escape through it to get to outside. So there's lots of very, very good companies out there. I don't know how you find them. I really don't. I mean, we've been doing it for 22 years and it's just, I give up a lot of my time to try and change to the industry. I think a lot of people think what I do is just to promote my business. It's not. It's to promote everybody that's on this panel and everybody that's interested in improving people's outcomes in life. That's the driver here. So if we're looking at competence, there's CPDs. Matt and Sam and everybody else has spoken about CPDs and what we can do there. In the eyes of the building regulator, the Building Safety Act, that's great. It's the best of what we have at the moment. But I mean, like we discussed yesterday, Dave, the fact that the Welsh government in its devolved nation is actually removing some apprenticeships and funding, even though they're trying to promote better buildings and indoor air quality. So there's a disconnect there. So I think the lead needs to come from industry, from associations, from trade associations, from networks, from people like us to really push and promote the message to say, you need competent people. If somebody comes to your home to fix your boiler, you'd ask for their gas safe card. If somebody comes to work on your electrics, they'd ask for the NICEC or whatever association for the electrical competence. That currently doesn't really exist for ventilation. And those that do exist are very, very poor. So I don't know what everybody else is.
I think
on that
what you
one.
will
Francesca's
find,
right in there.
what you
Go
will
on, Dave.
find, what you will find going forward is because of the insurance companies' involvements, they will be looking closer at competences in ability to have delivered something to a standard. So although it's a pain in one reflection that the insurance companies have to be involved, what it will do is you will need a certificate to be able to sign something off. So it will drive for standards, competences. How can you verify that you were capable of doing the job? And even better than that is the person who's looking after the building will have to check that you've got that competence to do the job they've employed you for. Otherwise, they are liable for it. So I think you'll find that as we progress and do bring more legislation in, which is sadly you don't want to over-legislate, but it's sad that you have to legislate to get someone to do something properly that they should be doing in the first place correctly. But it is driving change, it is driving risk, and it is driving competence to deliver the correct things that you say you can do.
I think it quite nicely segues into what I was going to say about there industry peer accountability. So we all know what good looks like in terms of a professional, competent individual. And then you need an enforcer that kind of sits outside of that as the third party validator, rather than us just all marking each other's homework being like, yeah, mate, that'll be fine. Because it is, and most of the feedback from end users is going to be based on level of service, not necessarily outcome. Because Nathan, some of those pictures that you put on LinkedIn, the air quality community look at it and go, oh dear God. But as a layman, you would look at it and go, I guess something's wrong with it because everyone's outraged, but I don't know what's wrong with it. So I think there's peer accountability that needs to be enforced by an external party. But you're absolutely right, because you wouldn't know where to start apart from just Googling good contractors near me as an individual or as an organisation, to be honest.
I think what will happen, Francesca, and what's happened in a number of in our BISA membership and ECA membership and other memberships, is that we are audited by our professional bodies and our capabilities to deliver types of work. So BISA will say, yes, this company's competent. We've audited them in relation to their ability to. So what we need to do is drive more clients to the industries that are regulating themselves to ensure their members are compliant to do the works they say they can do. And I think that will drive a better level of people in the industry. It'll drive more training. It'll drive more culpability, so that our professional bodies say, if you're a member of the ventilation component of BISA, then we have audited your ability to deliver that to the standards necessary in the industry. And I think that's where our professional body, because the government do want us as an industry to self-regulate. They do not want to regulate themselves. So what we have to do is drive what's good in our industry so that we can say, go and use a BISA member who's got this badge for ventilation, and we have already audited them in their capabilities to do so.
We've come to that point where there's only, unbelievably, about 5 minutes to go. Now, what I'd normally do to end up is to ask everybody to think about the one thing that people should take away. Dave's very cleverly preempted that with his last comment, but I'll let him have another go in a minute. I want to just deal with two quick questions that have come up in here. They're specific ones. If we can try and give quite a short answer, that'd be really interesting. The first one is, can we not push to get IEQ into a proposed Clean Air Act, which may or may not be progressing beyond the House of Lords? Does anybody want to answer that very quickly?
We are trying. We've been asked by central government to create, very similar to an EPC, an energy performance certificate, a well-being performance certificate. Now, if we can create that well-being performance certificate that people can say, well, as they have to say for building control at the moment, our building complies to EPC level, whatever. If we start driving a well-being performance certificate, that'll change an awful lot in relation to a lot of legislation.
That sounds really interesting. Are you going to tell us any more about that, or is it a watch this space?
I can't at the moment.
Oh, you teased the journalist with that last bit there. Okay, let's go straight into the second question. Equally interesting. We're talking about the importance of outdoor air, and we've talked about buildings as safe havens from the outdoor air. Can the filters on a top quality system capture the PM 2.5 coming from outside? And if not, how do we improve indoor air quality in those urban areas where the roadside is so bad?
In short, Andrew, yes, they can if you choose the right unit and the right filter grade as the option.
Talk to your supplier is the great answer to
right. But you need to be checking it's there to the right standards, the right percentage of particulate that it can capture. And then you also need to look at your ongoing maintenance a lot more regularly. The finer the filter, the more maintenance you're going to need.
It comes back to that system maintenance is as important as the system.
Exactly.
That's what Nathan was going to say.
Can I just add, though, there's a lot of carbon filters being used to get past air quality management areas and planning permission. There is currently no test for a carbon filter being installed in somebody's property to ensure that it is not saturated, that it is still working. The only official way to test a carbon filter is to remove it from the property, send it to a lab for lab analysis and a report. What domestic end user is going to do that? So manufacturers, I know there's some on here, need to get a grip and stop saying up to 5 years. It could be 5 weeks, depending on the location.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know what's in my R&M manual, and it's not 5 years.
Good point. Okay, so let's, bearing in mind we've got, now just a few minutes, 150 people on this call, hanging on your every word. What is the one thing that you would want to leave the audience with? I should go in alphabetical order if I could work out what that was. So that's Fran to go first.
I think it's definitely Dave, but I'll take it.
I'm doing surnames. Yeah, okay, got me there. Right.
The one thing that, God, I kind of want to combine two things, because actually, I think there's a phrase for it: actionable insights, because it's using data to understand what's going on to create things that you can actually do. Because I think lots of people probably join this call thinking, okay, what kind of solutions am I going to be presented with today? And it's been a really good conversation, but I think it's, where do we go after this conversation? Because we all know each other and we come together relatively frequently, but it's like, how do we bring our knowledge and our solutions together to disseminate this information more regularly than a webinar every now and again for 150 people to attend? But what about the other 150,000 that couldn't today? So I think it's that actionable insights and dissemination of information.
Thanks, Fran. Good. Sam?
For me, it's one word: is balance. The same as everything in life, you need to find a balance. And we'd always say, as a kind of a mold prevention, if you like, you find a balance between heating, ventilation, and insulation. As a loose rule, you'll have a happy, healthy building. And it's the same as anything. You find a balance between energy efficiency, sustainability, air quality. It will provide you with a happier living and working environment.
Thanks, Sam. So I make that Dave next.
Thank you very much. All I can say is change is coming. Be aware. Talk to us. We have the systems in place. Protect yourself and be a leader of well-being in the built environment.
Thank you. Matt?
One sentence. I think for me, it's to not be concerned, or to not be concerned about implementing healthy building technology and worrying about energy efficiency, because as I say it all the time, it's my hashtag on LinkedIn. An efficient building is a healthy building. And as some of the attendees have mentioned in the questions, is anyone educating the wider audience on the long-term benefits, absenteeism, energy costs, allergy, health, well-being, mental health, productivity, and all of those things? I think if we, as Dave put it, if we focus on well-being, we create a sustainable, healthy building anyway. So everything right now, the industry, everything we're trying to achieve, whether it's energy efficiency, sustainability, or health and well-being, each of those three key areas that we all focus on a daily basis, they complement one another. It's very much a holistic approach needed, and not every building is the same. Think of your buildings as individuals, as individual as we are in some cases.
Thanks, Matt. Nathan, to wrap up.
Please, can we stop calling outside air fresh? It is not. It gives. If we're the physicians of building, we need to be technically able to distinguish the difference. Fresh can mean cold. It's quite fresh outside today. You know, it is outside air. We have no idea what the quantity or quality of it is like. So please, can we stop calling outside air fresh?
Very succinct. Thank you. Well, once again, a great discussion, I think. Thanks to you all for your input. There's such a lot to be thinking about. And as we promised you, 2024 has a lot going on with IAQ and IEQ. And we'll be watching this space for some of those changes, because it's clearly going to have an impact on all of us. So thanks to the panelists. Thanks to the audience for listening in. The recording of this webinar will be online shortly when we've tidied up the technicalities. And we'll also put it on LinkedIn. And if anybody wants to carry on the discussion there, you can at Elemental. And we're online at elementaldigital.co.uk. I think we're going to have to keep talking about this. I think we're going to have to work out a way. We're certainly going to try and have something at the show in June, but maybe we'll get something in between times. But yeah, keep listening and please provide your input as you wish. But thanks to everyone.